This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Other than Black History Month, you know what time of the month this is. It's NBA All-Star time, man. And so now as we enter into the first week of February, a lot of great stuff happening, a lot of great storylines being built up. The race is on in the East and the West, and it's time now where after we go through the Super Bowl, all eyes will be fixated on the NBA. And to discuss all the stuff that's happening in the association, you know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, Don Man contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net. The Big Kahuna and my PNC, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. What's going on, brother?
What's good, man? Salute to all the fans and listeners of the NBA Baseline. Another great week of NBA action to discuss. Amazing show we have on deck. Some great topics, some stuff that we've been chomping at the bit to get into the discussion. So why don't you tell them what we have in store, my brother?
Oh, man, we have an awesome show slated for everybody. In a little bit, we will have our man, Daniel Reynolds. He is the editor-in-chief of Same Page Team and also the manager for SB Nation's Raptors HQ. He'll be on to talk about one of the hottest teams in basketball, the Toronto Raptors. Also in our segment of The Drop, we'll be talking about some current NBA trade rumors that are now surfacing. Some names that probably haven't been mentioned are now getting thrown into the hat. We'll definitely get into that. We got our great guest with us, our man Gerald Brown from the Line Sports Show. He will help us out in our segment, They Reminisce. It's a great segment. We will be talking about the Magic and Bird era and how that has transcended the NBA that we are now viewing as we speak. And of course, I covered it coast to coast where we discuss all the topics happening in the association. So we got a great slab of stuff happening and we cannot wait to dig in with you. We appreciate you guys throwing on your headphones and tuning into us, the Baseline NBA podcast. As always, you know how to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. But we always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA_the baseline, hashtag up the baseline. Let us know who you are and what you're about. Available on all the major platforms, available on Microsoft TuneIn, Stitcher Radio, iTunes, and Player FM. So we always encourage you to download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It is time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
Put the bone gristle. Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week joining us, we have a great guest. He is currently keeping his finger on the pulse of one of the hottest teams playing basketball right now. And considering the fact that we're still in winter technically up here in the north, it's only fitting that we talk about how the Toronto Raptors are ripping up the NBA season thus far. We got our man, Daniel Reynolds. He is editor-in-chief of Same Page Team, and you can also catch him as he's one of the managers for SB Nation's Raptors HQ. Daniel, thanks for joining us this week to talk about the Raptors and their current winning streak, man.
Hey, guys. I'm glad to be here.
Daniel, first of all, let's talk about this unprecedented streak that the Raptors are on. 11 straight wins. Clearly, that is a franchise record. And the talk of the town is this Raptors team for real? Can we obviously say over the last couple of years, we often thought maybe it was fool's gold, eye candy, whatever you want to call it, that this Raptors team, once they come together, the potential is there, but somehow, some way, we couldn't completely buy into it. Can we truly now say that can we be safe to say that we can start sipping on the Kool-Aid about how good this Raptors team truly is thus far with this current win streak?
I definitely think it's time to buy in. I think you've seen it over the last couple of years. The team's gradually gotten better and figured out what it takes to win and get to that sort of next level. They're obviously they're not in the sort of championship discussion yet, but definitely the way they're playing right now and also sort of the way they run their team and the way that the key players, Kyle Lowry and DeRozan, have grown together. It's definitely something where you're looking at this team going, yeah, this is a legitimate team that's ready to make some real noise in the playoffs, hopefully.
So how impressed are you with this team thus far, with Lowry and DeRozan obviously you say leading this roster, but this is a team that hasn't had its full complement of players, I think, for more than like 5 or 6 games. Carroll's been out, Valanciunas has been out. As a matter of fact, Carroll is still out. How much further can this team go, when Carroll and everybody gets back into the fold?
Well, that's one of the interesting things right now is that if you ask any Raptors fans, it's exciting to watch this rotation work. They put James Johnson in the starting lineup and he does the spot starter thing. But what's interesting is how, I think when Gerald gets back, now you've got that one more defender, one more guy you can throw at, the LeBron James, the Paul George, the sort of the wing player. These are the kind of players the Raptors have historically had trouble sort of dealing with, and it's definitely something where you're looking at the rest of the roster going, well, there's not a lot of holes on this team. Like there's not a lot of players that you have to worry about, or you have to sort of, you have to sort of just be nervous about in the game. And so it's definitely something where you're looking at going, well, this is a team that's well constructed. And I think the fact that they've been able to weather injuries to Carroll for so long and Valanciunas for a period of time there and still be winning, I think is indicative of that.
Raptors HQ manager Daniel Reynolds joining us here on the baseline. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at @AKA_Reynolds. So we're talking about the chemistry and the dynamic duo that is DeRozan and Lowry. And it's interesting over the course of the preseason and the offseason, we were sitting here saying, who should be the best duo combo, guard combo coming into the season. Everyone felt like obviously number one is Curry and Thompson. And then really what it should be is Beal and Wall. And that has not really panned out.
Mm-hmm.
Now the murmurings around the NBA is the true number two right now is the combination of Lowry and DeRozan. And this 11-game span has really been unprecedented when you look at the offensive numbers that both of these guys have put together to propel this Raptors team with this win streak. How has this chemistry galvanized the rest of the team to play to the kind of level now that we're giving this kind of conversation to talk about the Raptors being a legitimate force in the Eastern Conference?
Well, I think the chemistry's been there since they've come together, since they've been on the same team. I think gradually, obviously, now you're starting to see it, on social media, all the sort of jokes and the bromance, so as it were, between the two guys, and that definitely trickles down. I think throughout the rest of the team, you see it in the locker room. There is a sense of camaraderie. But I think the key thing this year is that both guys are healthy. Last year, DeRozan was injured for 20 games. I think that took him out of his rhythm somewhat. And then Lowry, he missed some games and he sort of was breaking down in the second half of the season. And then you saw it in the playoffs. You mentioned Beal and Wall. They really took it to them in the playoffs. And I think that was part of it. They just were never, Lowry and DeRozan were never quite on the same page because of injuries. And now this year, Lowry's, gotten himself in even better shape, and DeRozan's playing the best basketball of his career. And I think everything's sort of hitting at the right time, and they're all sort of they're playing their best, and as a result, the team is coming along with them. And I think if it keeps going like this, it's very exciting.
So are you at all nervous about the situation with DeRozan? Again, they've kind of developed, I've even seen on social media, kind of like this buddy cop thing going on where they really do have this chemistry. But DeRozan's in his contract year, has already said he's going to opt out. Do you see the Raptors' success this year in the playoffs having a key impact on whether or not he comes back? Or do you feel like DeRozan and Lowry, that combination, that connection is good enough for we're trying to definitely has the inside track to bring DeRozan back next season?
I'm not worried about him re-signing. I think he's made it clear that he's interested and he definitely wants to return here. I think the only real sort of suitor that maybe could catch his eye would be the Lakers because he's from California, he's from LA. But I think the Raptors have the inside track to re-sign him. I think there was a lot of discussion about whether or not it would be worth it to sign him. That was the big thing at the beginning of the year or last year. There was all the rumbling of, well, if this guy becomes your highest paid player, that sort of caps you at a certain ceiling where this is as far as you're going to go. DeRozan's a good player, but everyone sort of goes, you need that great player to get you to the next level. But I think as we're watching now, he's managed to maximize every one of his skills and he keeps improving on everything. It was post game, it was shooting, getting to the line, finishing through contact. Now you're starting to see even a little more 3-point shooting. He's not really a 3-point shooter as of yet, but you forget that he's turning 27 this year. So, he's already been in the league 7 years. And that, you forget the fact that every single year, if you look at his stats, they've gradually improved. So it is kind of, I think the max contract discussion has been sort of, in a sense, been settled. I think the Raptors are going to re-sign him. And I think he definitely wants to come back. And I think that's sort of the working condition for next season. Although, yes, one last thing I'll say: if they lose in the first round of the playoffs, we can maybe sort of throw some of this out the window.
Editor-in-Chief Daniel Reynolds joining us here of Same Page Team. Go check him out at www.samepageteam.com. And speaking of which, I'm glad that you actually mentioned this, Daniel, because my next question is, the state of mind and the sense of urgency for the Raptors and what's going to happen as we start trickling down to the end of the season and we start talking about playoffs. I don't think there's any question that the Toronto Raptors are positioning themselves as obviously a playoff team. I think the question becomes, where are they going to seed themselves, and whether or not they can catch up with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who obviously are in a state of flux. Now, we've seen what happened just recently with the Cavaliers management firing David Blatt, Tyronn Lue now being the head coach. And there's still talk about Dwayne Casey and whether or not, he is still going to wind up being the Raptors head coach, even with the success of this winning season. So clearly we've seen a head coach is not safe just because the team has the best record in the Eastern Conference. I mean, with the way that you see this team constructed and how this team is performing, and let's take Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan out of the equation for a moment, and you look at the rest of the supporting cast, how safe do you think it's going to be for Dwayne Casey if this Raptors team does fail one more time, not getting out of the first round of the playoffs? Will Masai Ujiri, basically give Dwayne Casey his walking papers? I mean, how much is predicated on them getting out of the first round, even with the success of this season?
Well, I think it's all predicated on that success. For sure, if they lose in the first round, particularly if they're the number 2 seed, which right now it looks like they have a pretty good hold on, for sure there's going to be huge changes, and I think it's going to start with Casey. Just because that's sort of the easiest move to make. You get a new coach and then you start looking at what players you're going to do. I think Ujiri set up the team well to sort of have talented players, reasonable contracts. They've invested in their young players. Valanciunas just signed a deal that starts next year. Ross starts his deal next year, and then they got Corey Joseph on I think a pretty reasonable deal. And then of course the Carroll contract, which we're still sort of deciding whether or not that was completely worth it because, he hasn't played that much. But I think for sure, if they lose in the first round or if they have a weak showing, like if they get swept again, I think, if they get swept again in the second round, if something really out of character happens, then yeah, I think there's going to be a very hard look at sort of what the ceiling that you've got with Casey as your coach. I think he's a good coach, one of the better coaches in the league, but yeah, no one's, as you said, no one's safe, and no coach is safe, and it becomes the easiest sort of thing to change in terms of optics. The general manager looks and goes, well, they're not going to fire me yet, so I better make some change at the coaching level.
Well, obviously Casey, Lowry, and DeRozan have been the focus of this team and the focus of this conversation. But the sum of the parts here are really, I think, it was what's made this team work. They're playing great defense. I think they're one of the top 10s in defensive rating thus far. Talk to me a little bit about the guys who have impressed you the most between Corey Joseph, Luis Scola, even Bismack Biyombo, Terrence Ross, coming in and accepting that reserve role. Which one of those guys has impressed you the most this season?
Well, I got to say it's got to be Corey Joseph. He's been when they signed him, there was a bit of a question of whether the Raptors sort of overpaid him a little bit. I mean, he's young, he comes from the Spurs system, so everyone was kind of like, well, he's got talent. But they signed him for something like $7 million a year. And, he was basically a backup. He was basically a third point guard for the Spurs. So there was some question of whether or not he could handle the load. And you've seen him. I mean, last night he had a solid game. He's more often than not been the sort of very, very good sort of decision maker. He's able to play well with or without Lowry, which has been happening more and more now. They've been running a bench unit with Lowry or a bench unit with DeRozan. And he's sort of helped stabilize the defense, which was what killed them last year. Last year, this has been the sort of the dirty secret of the team. Last year they had all these guys that they could put up some points, guys like Lou Williams and Grievous Vasquez, but now they suddenly added guys like Joseph, Carroll theoretically, and Biyombo. And Biyombo's another one where he's a limited offensive player, but I mean, you go at the rim now against the Raptors, and he's there making blocks and sort of throwing himself around, and it changes the whole tenor of the game and the team, because now they have truly become a solid defensive team, whereas last year they were ranked something like 23rd in defensive efficiency, which, I mean, that's tough in the playoffs to get any sort of traction unless you're, a historically great offense.
Daniel Reynolds joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, our segment of the breakdown. A couple questions before we let you go, Daniel. For a moment, I just want you to put your GM thinking cap on and you look at this roster up and down. Do you believe that this roster is constructed to take it to the next level? Or do you believe that Masai Ujiri needs to consider the idea of making some kind of move by the trade deadline to really bolster this roster, to get them not just past the first round, but really to supplement the type of season that they're currently having and to validate the legitimacy of this team being an Eastern Conference threat?
I think this team, as constructed and when healthy, assuming Carroll comes back, let's say next month, I think they're good enough to definitely challenge, to definitely go to the Eastern Conference Final, definitely challenge Cleveland. I don't think they're going to get destroyed, and I think they can. And I think they can run with or beat any team in the Eastern Conference, and they can even take a game or two from Cleveland if they catch them at the right time. There's chatter that the Raptors should look at. I mean, the story at the beginning of the year was they needed help at the power forward spot because Patterson's good, but he's more of a bench player. And Scola, he brings a nice IQ and he's a smart player, but obviously he's 35. His best years behind him. So there was some talk of that the power forward spot is a bit of a problem. I hesitate to say the Raptors need to make a move, partly because I don't think there is a move out there that makes them they have to make that makes them that much better. I don't think there's if they could, they have a few assets, they have draft picks and stuff that they're probably going to have to flip just because they have too many young players on the roster as it is. I don't think there's anything they can do or any player they can get that would be that much better. There was talk of maybe trying to get Markieff Morris or you go for Terrence Jones or something, to fill that power forward spot. But now you're talking about flipping Patrick Patterson in your draft pick for someone who is, maybe only a few degrees better than Patterson. So I don't know if there is really a move to make. And I do think that this team, as constructed, can challenge any team. I mean, yeah, they're still a notch below LeBron James, but I mean, so is most of the rest of the league. So I think that's sort of the zone they find themselves in.
So last question, excuse me, kind of on the lighter note before I let you get out of here. What is the overall feeling in Toronto right now? All-Stars coming to the city. What is that feeling like for you as a media type, someone who's been covering the team, to finally see the All-Star game returned or come to Toronto for the first time, if you will? And then also what's your feeling on the Dwayne Casey situation? Do you think Ty Lue should give up that coaching situation, let Dwayne Casey coach in his own building?
Well, first, I'll say it's very exciting to have the All-Star game in Toronto. I think if you talk to any Toronto sports fans, Raptors fans in particular, they always feel a little slighted. In this city, basketball has always been, sort of the second sport. Hockey's always the number one thing. The Leafs are the big thing, the Maple Leafs. So the Raptors never seem to get the attention. And then on top of that, the Toronto as a sort of basketball city doesn't seem to is never really talked about in terms of, the broader sort of NBA culture. So it is very exciting to sort of be part of, or to see the whole sort of NBA scene come to Toronto, and sort of that to be the exciting thing of the year. And so the spirit in Toronto, I think, is going to be good. I think the event is going to be good. I mean, it's going to be February. It's going to be a bit cold, but it should be very good. And I think people are going to be surprised at sort of how much fun Toronto is. Again, because I think some people still don't know what's going on up here. And as far as the head coaching position goes, I'm on the side that, yes, that Casey should have been the coach. I think it's kind of funny that Lue, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess the league's never really faced a situation like this before, but I do think it's kind of funny that Lue gets after coaching only a handful of games is the head coach. And it's funny that in the Western Conference, you got, what's his face there? Kerr is now going to coach the West team, and he's barely coached any games for the Warriors. Or the Kerr can't coach it, so Popovich is coaching for him. Anyway, so I think, I'm of the opinion that Casey should have coached, but I mean, I guess that's what they decided, so that's it.
It's kind of interesting, Daniel, that as we, obviously as we end our interview with you, My man Shaw just safely shoots me a text about whether or not I should be bringing up a Drake diss because of my affinity for Drake and his love for sports and how in any and every other sport where Drake appears, it just seems like it's like the kiss of death for teams. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you it's my conspiracy theory that, as much as I love the fact that Drake has helped reinvigorated the love for basketball, for Toronto Raptors fans, for the sake of the Toronto Raptors and them playing in the first round, is there any talk about them possibly, banning Drake from the arena at least at least for home games, just or at least until after they finish?
No, he's got a courtside seat. He was at the game last night, actually. So no, he's not going anywhere. He'll be there.
Well, we'll expect him in the hotline bling to be in full effect for Toronto's All-Star. He is the man editor-in-chief of Same Page Team. Check him out on Twitter at Same Page Team, and you can also find out some great stuff that he does for SB Nation's Raptors HQ. So catch him on Twitter at RaptorsHQ. Our man Daniel Reynolds on the Twitter handle, AKA_Reynolds. Daniel, we appreciate you hopping on, and hopefully this time around when my man Shaw rides on up to Toronto, that the next Twitter pic that I catch is both of you guys with sunglasses and sitting on lawn chairs, eyes up to the sparkling sun. It's a little different here in Jersey, but hopefully you two guys don't have a bromance thing going on when you guys cover the All-Star weekend.
Right on. Thanks for having me on, guys.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check us out, Baseline Live on Ravel TV. Catch us doing our thing now as we continue into the heart of the NBA season. We'll be doing coverages and live discussions through Ravel TV. So check it out, www.raveltv.com, and also at Ravel TV, this Twitter handle. So Shaw, this week on the drop, as we get close to the All-Star weekend, and I know it's all about the All-Star festivities, but I think the underlying theme is going to be the next week or two after the All-Star weekend, because that's going to be the trade deadline. And, already, we've been talking about how there are certain major guys that need to be moved, but I think there's a few people that I think we need to kind of keep on the radar, because on the low level, they may not have superstar name power to them attached. However, they could have potential team impact, empowerment. And so I know that there's a couple of guys that you were looking at specifically that we need to be watching for, because should the trade be made, they could actually be game changers for those respective teams.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple names that we'll run through them real quick. Wojo had brought up, and Mark Stein from ESPN also brought up, that the Hawks are quietly shopping Jeff Teague. This is a situation worth monitoring. That means that they believe Dennis Schroeder is their point guard of the future. And while the Hawks are, one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, they quietly believe that they can maybe do just as well without Teague on the roster, and look to try potentially bring in a wing if he is moved. Teague is being linked to the Knicks. He's being linked to the Nets. He's being linked to the Utah Jazz as well. And this is a situation I think you definitely need to monitor, because there's a good possibility he gets moved. Tyreke Evans, Ryan Anderson, two guys from New Orleans Pelicans, are also being considered to be tradable assets. Tyreke has that knee injury, so it's a little concerning about him, and if a team is willing to take that on, because he has been historically had a lot of injuries, especially with the knee. And I'm not too sure if there's teams that are going to want to take on that contract. Ryan Anderson is a guy who provides that spacing and that shooting, overall great locker room guy as well too. So there's a good possibility teams are going to have some interest in him. Same thing, Booken has been linked to him. There's a couple other teams too. I think Boston was remotely linked, and basically anybody who needs shooting at that forward position. Detroit is the other team too, because they really like to have that space around Andre Drummond. Rudy Gay is a guy that you need to watch out for as well. Sacramento doesn't seem to be enamored with that situation, although they were competing for a spot in the Western Conference currently. Gay just doesn't seem to fit in their plans, which is a little concerning to me, because Gay is partly responsible for getting Rondo to come to that team, and Rondo and Gay have a very good relationship. So I don't know if Gay gets moved, how that affects Rondo's contract situation going into next season. And the Los Angeles Lakers are also a team looking to move all their veterans, as they realize they need to have an eye on the future. Brandon Bass, Roy Hibbert, and the like. All those guys are being rumored to potentially be on the block.
Yeah, one of the things that I like, Shaw, is that for the first three guys that you had made mention of, Jeff Teague, Tyreke Evans, Ryan Anderson, I call them about time trade rumors, because it's about time that we start talking about these guys and the potential about them being moved away from the current teams that they're playing for. We've said this numerous times in our previous podcasts for the times that we've been covering the NBA, that the Atlanta Hawks need a point guard that's going to make this team go. And whether it's an aggressive scoring point guard or an aggressive facilitating point guard, Jeff Teague just always seems to sit in the middle. He does just enough, but he doesn't do enough to get this Atlanta Hawks team to propel to the levels that I think Coach Budenholzer would like to see them go. Now, if they believe that Dennis Schroeder is truly that guy, I'd like to think it's more so on the fact that he is a great play creator and he's very aggressive in his ability to get open shots for guys like Paul Millsap and for Al Horford. So that to me would make more sense, that now would be as good a time as any, especially for teams like the New York Knicks that look for a veteran point guard that has a potential maybe to not completely overshadow the play of what Kristaps Porzingis and Carmelo Anthony is doing for the New York Knicks, but clearly somebody that knows how to dribble, drive, penetrate, and create better looks for those type of players. For Tyreke Evans and for Ryan Anderson, I've been telling you this, and whether or not you want to consider it maybe my conspiracy theory or not, I just think it's just plain as day that the chemistry with Tyreke Evans, Anthony Davis, Eric Gordon, and Drew Holiday, it's just not working. And they need to move this guy while his talent is still at a peak, given the situation that it's been for him over the last few years. So I really like the idea that we're now throwing that name out in the hat, because I really do think that Tyreke Evans still has some great game to play. And I think he could be better suited for teams. Maybe even something like a Philadelphia 76ers team. Remember, Tyreke Evans kind of helped resurrect the image and the profile of the Sacramento Kings being a relevant basketball team for a little bit when he came out his rookie season. So why not play with a team that needs an uptick and needs an upstart, allow him the space to grow and cater his game to? And Ryan Anderson, look, you need a sharpshooter. I like the idea of him possibly going to maybe the Detroit Pistons or the Boston Celtics. Clearly a front court player who can hit the consistent shot, but he's a reliable veteran. He comes in and spots minutes for Anthony Davis, who plays the 5-4. It's something that I know the Boston Celtics would love to get a consistent upgrade with. Or if you're the Detroit Pistons, while they're enamored with Marcus Morris and he's logging in a ton of minutes, he's not giving you that consistent productivity offensively. And I know both of those teams would love those. Rudy Gay, I agree with you. I really don't like the idea of his name being thrown out there. I kind of would love to see this Rondo Gay Cousins dynamic, see it through the rest of this season. Let's just look at it for what it is. Neither Gay Cousins or Rondo have been fully healthy for the better part of the year together to allow this thing to come to fruition. So for the talks to be out there like this, to me, I feel like it's a haste move. It's obviously like a salary dump type thing, and I don't like it because, again, basically you're cutting off a team's potential to be good in a time where there's a little window of an opportunity for them to sneak in and maybe do some damage should they be able to make the playoffs. And as far as just getting rid of any of the Lakers vets, maybe we're doing them a service talking about getting rid of them, because I don't think any of them wants to be currently playing in the situation that they're playing in Los Angeles. So, all together, Shaw, I think the ones that I really want to see happen more than anybody is the Teague, Tyreke Evans, and Ryan Anderson, and maybe the Lakers vets before Rudy Gay. But clearly Teague, Evans, and Anderson, I would love to see how strong those rumors continue to emerge as we move forward to the NBA All-Star Weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And, three other names that you throw out there. I mean, everyone knows the situation with the Phoenix Suns and Markieff Morris, and some of the other guys might be available. There's starting to be some mumblings that maybe Brandon Knight might be on the block, but obviously he's injured and, dealing with the groin thing right now. So we don't know if that's something that will come. But Markieff is a guy that everyone seems to think is going to get moved. Greg Monroe, Milwaukee, who, we just finished talking about the Bucks on a Rivalcast not too long ago. They don't seem to really think he is a fit or the fit that they hoped he'd be, especially for their defense. And their defense has taken a huge slide back, dropping 20-plus spots in defensive rating this season. And a lot of that is being attributed to the lack of rim protection that Monroe brings at that center spot. And Teague's teammate, Al Horford, has also been mentioned in rumors simply because his contract is up. And the Hawks are a team that we don't know if they're going to continue, or are they going to be happy continuing to just be decent and good, or they're not, or if they're ever going to reach that elite level. And Horford is a very, very big cog in that. So they may also try to move Horford before they lose him in free agency. So those are three other names you need to watch out for on the trade market.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. And I'd like the fact that there are more names being thrown out there, and we're going to try and keep, our eyes open on a lot of these names, because more than anything else, Shaw, you don't have to move a big name. You just need to move a name over to another team. And clearly you can see the dynamic of that team change. And it could be for the better. And maybe in some cases we've seen it could be for the worse. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
They reminisce over you. Listen.
Time now for They Reminisce. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And I think it's been far too long, Shaw, since we've been able to do this segment. It definitely the first time in 2016, right?
Absolutely, man. I'm ready to jump right in. This is a great topic. I'm sure all NBA fans are going to love, man.
Yeah, it's one that I think if you are someone who loves sports and you love the era of competitive basketball, which to me I find to be, next to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain days, the rivalry between Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, to me, just it's pretty much unbridled and unmatched. And I dare anybody to argue the idea or the concept that there was a time when, we've even had this over the last, 30 years now of this kind of competitive play. I think we've hoped for it, but nothing has ever even come close to that time. If you were there, you embraced it, and I think you became better for understanding how great the game of basketball is. And to help us discuss this era and the magic between Larry Bird and Earvin Magic Johnson, of course, we got to bring the best of the best on there. It's been long overdue, and I'm glad we got him in. Our man, Gerald Brown, he hosts one of the best NBA shows on Sirius XM. You can always catch him as well, too, the Line Sports Show, him and his boy Howie. Gerald, man, thanks for hopping on with us. Happy New Year to you, brother.
Happy New Year to you, brothers, man. Great to be on with y'all, man. Always a pleasure to be in your presence.
Man, and listen, the presence couldn't be better considering the fact that we're talking about ultimately, well, in my opinion, for maybe our generation, because I think we all fit within that realm. Our generation, one of the best rivalries, maybe of all the sports, but definitely when we talk about NBA basketball, and if you are ever trying to be a purist or a historian, you want to learn about the game, you have to look at these two iconic players in the era of the 1980s between Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. And the first thing I want to get from you, Gerald, is, when you first saw these two guys going at it, what was your take? What did you feel from that experience watching, these two great players going at each other?
Well, I think I was just like everybody else. I think I was blown away by the skill set that these two individuals had. I think Magic Johnson was our first introduction, aside from maybe Michael Ray Richardson, those big guards, maybe even Oscar Robertson. But this was a guy that was truly 6'9", who can really run the court, handle the ball, and his presence. And it was so interesting during that time. I happened to have the fortunes of being a ball boy for the Knicks, so I would see at least Magic once a year, and even Larry sometimes more than a couple of times a year. And to see Magic's, his awareness on the court was unbelievable. And then on the flip side of that, you look at a guy like Larry Bird, who wasn't the greatest athlete, but his IQ was unbelievable. And what he used to do to his players and people that in terms of guarding him, I always felt like he always had that sincere edge, because you know what, you were at his mercy because you didn't know what he was going to do, so you were already defeated.
So you're looking at this, from a different perspective, somebody, kind of growing up in that time, as you mentioned, being a ball boy in New York at that time. What side of the fence, if you will, obviously, because again, you have to stay true to New York here. But what side of the fence did you fall on when it came to the Showtime Lakers, and kind of the gritty, Boston Celtics with the Magic Bird, rivalry?
Well, to be honest with you, I kind of took an approach that I thought it was after the fact that, the NBA, we knew that, listen, let's be honest, the NBA in some regards is very similar to perhaps the greatest marketing ploy in all of sports, and that's the WWE, in terms of marketing the game and the way it was set up. And I think those battles were so intense and unique. But, like you said before, I mean, I didn't live in L.A. I was in Boston. Here I'm working with the Knicks, and, I knew that if the Knicks go further in the playoffs, it was an opportunity for me to make a little bit more money and see these guys be able to advance. But I kind of really felt perhaps maybe becoming a Celtics fan because I saw those guys a little bit longer, and then because the fact is that they were in the same division, I had the fortune that when I went away to school for 1 year, I had an opportunity to continue as a ballboy for the Celtics. So got a chance to know, God rest his soul, Dennis Johnson, Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, John Bagley, and just saw the work ethic that these guys had, and mainly just the way they approached the game. So I kind of would say more than ever probably the Celtics, just because the fact is having more opportunities to see them up close as opposed to once a year with the Lakers coming to town.
Gerald Brown joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, our segment, They Reminisce. Gerald hosts the Bottom Line Sports Show, and he's also a part of Sirus XM NBA. So catch him on channel 207 Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays from 10 to 1, Sundays from 10 to 1. Gerald, we're talking about an era in which between these two athletes, they were able to amass 8 championships. Now, I know a lot of people in this modern generation, they don't like the long runs of teams, constantly going to the finals, constantly, getting an NBA title. I think maybe after Michael Jordan, everyone loves to see the little guy get to the dance and eventually win that championship, or the team that, is part of the small market franchise. But I think I grew up in the era where I can appreciate longevity and sustainability. And these guys not only were just cornerstone franchise pieces for their organizations to continue the success that their predecessors have made, but I think more importantly, they kind of set a trend of how important it is to keep the traditional old school basketball teams like the New York Knicks, like the Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Lakers, respectively, a part of the fold in this new generation of the NBA. What in your mindset, when you see these two guys and you think about how they played against each other, can you in your mindset, did you ever think that we will probably ever see this in our in this new generation of NBA, or were they the last of a dying breed, basically?
I don't think that they were the last of a dying breed. I think that, as I said before, as you look at it now compared to, when they were playing, we really see that, the NBA was built on these guys' shoulders, and essentially the NBA, when it was coming out of a dark period where the big drug scandals, you're having a lot of drugs involved in a lot of the issues with a lot of the teams and stuff, David Stern took the notion and really made sure that, again, his predecessors from commissioners decided to make sure that they made those franchises the cornerstone franchises. So with that being said, these guys had Hall of Famers, like the Boston Celtics had Hall of Famers that were on the bench. These teams were so loaded that if you look at a lot of the other teams, they really couldn't match up because they were just so much more talented than the other ones. And I think that it was good to build a league and the interest. And what they were able to do was unbelievable. And it's not to take anything away from them. But when we look at the game today, when we can have, at some point, you can have, maybe it wasn't for that long period of time, but Kobe and LeBron James being in battle, or LeBron and Kevin Durant. I think that really set the tone. But as a team sport, I don't think we'll see that again, because I think that in some regards, I take that back, we might, but because of the fact is that we have the free agency and the salary cap, where teams are now starting to try to put 2 and 3 stars on their team, which essentially you need in order to win in the NBA more than ever. But clearly, that was an era where it was unbelievable. But I think that we have seen more skilled guys and perhaps even better skilled guys than between those two.
Well, to me, that rivalry was very unique, simply because of the stark contrast in the players and their skill sets, as you alluded to a little bit earlier. I think there was definitely a little bit of a play on, Magic being the Showtime and Larry Bird being, the grit and grind type of guy, if you will, to borrow that phrase from Memphis currently right now. But where do you see, and, this is obviously kind of a little bit of a touchy subject, But where do you see the race issue in that? A lot of people during that era was kind of like they saw it as a black versus white thing, and which is a very interesting concept when you think about how that era helped to bring the league a lot more fame. But where do you stand on that? Do you think at any point, or do you think a lot of people saw it as a black and white thing per se, in regards to Magic and Larry Bird?
Oh, of course, hands down. I mean, let's be honest. The NBA really on the shoulders of these two individuals, they marketed that. I mean, the LA, which was really, again, the stark contrast compared to Boston, which we know is really a predominantly white town, Irish. And we had LA, which was, minority based with, the Mexicans and the Latin descent, but also primarily the African-American culture. So that was one of those things where, it was an era of basketball where the brothers played this way. This is where you go to the park after the games. Brothers wanted to emulate the Magic Johnson and the Lakers up-tempo fast break. You didn't really have, when you go play some other places or you play with white players, you would play that sort of, back screen cut, 3 passes, 4 passes, and all that stuff. You want to sort of emulate with a half-court set that a lot of the guys played. So I think clearly that was one of those tools that, the NBA took advantage of and ran with it. The NBA made a ton of money off of just really that whole setup. And if I'm not mistaken, that perhaps may have been, with the exception of perhaps at one point in time, maybe the decision to try to say a rivalry between Bill Walton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, even though they went to school. Really, that didn't come to fruition because Walton couldn't stay healthy. But if you look at that, that was perhaps maybe the second rivalry, but the first rivalry where you had two individuals from different ethnic backgrounds really in a situation, rivals, and wanted to compete. And the NBA saw what they were able to accomplish in the NCAA Final Four and the championship game and the attention that it brought. They wanted to translate that over to the NBA.
Gerald Brown joining us here, host of the Bottom Line Sports Show. Gerald, I got to agree with you. I think that, one of the things that it's kind of funny, man, because I don't want to use the word reverse racism in the kind of context that I think people tend to look at it from a negative perspective, but from a sports perspective, it's something that can be appreciated because, we saw a guy coming out of Indiana State University and a guy coming out of Michigan State University, and I'm sure anybody who lives in New York, like they ever heard of those universities, minus the era of unless you were, someone who truly followed basketball, didn't know where those places were. And wasn't on your list of places to ever go to. And here, two iconic players come out of there, and you look at them, and you thought the roles should be reversed. You thought that Magic Johnson should have been coming out of Gary, Indiana, or something like that. And, Larry Bird, would have been in a nice, suburb setting type of background. And yet each of these guys completely transformed the perception or the persona of how the game is influenced, not just in urban cities, but also in suburban cities. How long did it take before you became a believer of Larry Bird and what he brought to the table, how his game could easily translate to what we saw on the courts in New York City?
Well, I think really where, being a ball boy and having that opportunity to see him play and sit courtside and to see, he wasn't the most athletic and talent. He wasn't the most gifted athletically, but yet his IQ was so high, and yet the players that he played with, their IQ was so high. It became a game within a game, and just understanding how to be able to understand how to move on the court, moving without the ball, being able to see everybody, and still be able to play at a pace that was different from what Magic Johnson was doing. Because, again, that fast break, up-tempo, LA, Laker, fast break and stuff, that was still really something that was under control. And I think it was something hard to emulate. But so it's ironic you say that when you would go to the park, it was easier to translate Larry Bird's game than Magic Johnson's game. Because, again, you have to be able to play that up-tempo style. Players on your team, you're running, but you still have to be under control. Whereas with Larry, it's fundamental 101 all the way across the board, minus any type of flash.
If there was to be a number two for on both sides for that, because I think both teams were extremely loaded, and Magic and Larry led their respective organizations. But could you pick a number two on either side that was probably most important, and not necessarily in furthering the rivalry per se between Magic and Larry specifically, but between the Celtics and Lakers at that time? Which guy on each side would be like the number two, would you say, behind Magic and Larry?
Well, clearly it would be Kareem on the Lakers. And then it's so funny because, it seems apparent that with the Celtics, it was perhaps interchangeable. You could say on one hand, Kevin McHale, but then on the flip side of that, God rest his soul, Dennis Johnson. So I think that you might have to say a 2A and 2B for the Celtics, whereas with the Lakers, it was strictly Kareem. As much as the credit and the attention that Magic got playing in Game 7 and jumping center, and Kareem couldn't play because of the ankle, really Kareem averaged 35 in that series. And it's identical to the whole thing where we look at Knicks history, Willis Reed coming out of the locker room, hobbling, he only scores 2 points. But, Clyde Frazier has like 30-plus points and stuff like that, and nobody even talks about that. So it's just so funny that you look at that. But even in some regards, you might can even say a 1A and 1B with Kareem and Magic as well.
Gerald Brown joining us here. Gerald, a couple of thoughts, before we let you ride on out of here off into the sunset. When I think about this rivalry, this era of basketball, if you will, between Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, I think about what the game represented at the time and how important it was to win games. I know that there's a business in the game of basketball. And so my question to you is does this NBA, the current NBA state that we're looking at right now, does this NBA need a Bird and Johnson type rivalry? Or do you think that it should stay within its confines of so that we can be able to respect the era in which these guys brought up the NBA and the game of basketball and how it's transcended to where we're looking at it right now?
I think it needs to stay the way it is, and I think that we need to look at that and reminisce, because if it goes back, then that means the game has taken a step back. In some regards, it does need to take a step back because of the lack of fundamentals, the lack of a high basketball quality IQ is severely missing in this game. If we go back, it really shows perhaps that the progress wasn't there, but yet the fact is I think that what they were able to accomplish and where the game is at right now, keep in mind, the door has been open for your San Antonio Spurs, your Oklahoma City Thunder, your sort of non-traditional major market teams having an opportunity to compete for a championship, but more importantly, the brand of basketball that a San Antonio Spurs can play is now something that is marketable. It's for a few years prior, we all heard that the Spurs play boring basketball. Well, they didn't play above the rim. They played fundamental basketball. But the way the game is now and the lack of that type of quality of basketball, you appreciate the Spurs in the way they play even more.
So before the last question, we let you go. Is there anything out there? I mean, I know you've alluded to it a little bit, but is there anything out there in today's current game that even reminds you remotely? Because I think from maybe even from a legal standpoint at this point right now, they could never market, a rivalry they did, the black versus white thing now. Like that would just get crushed, in the media circle nowadays. But is there anything or anybody out there that you think could or potentially be, on that same level in terms of, galvanizing one group of maybe basketball fans in terms of a style of play from a player standpoint? Is there any two players are out there or even teams out there that you think could have that, have that lasting effect coming up?
I think, it's interesting you say that, because if you look at today's game, the way free agency has been established more than ever, which it really essentially helped develop the Lakers and the Celtics in yesteryear when you didn't really have the free agency to the point it is now. I think it's very difficult because of the pretty much the constant movement of players. But I do believe that LeBron James is a guy, along with his play, and any type of players or players from the other teams, perhaps the Golden State Warriors could be a rivalry that could be something that evolves into it. I think the NBA has tried so hard to sort of find that rivalry that has been missing, where you had Sixers and Celtics, the sort of interconference rivalries. I think Chicago and Cleveland could be a great rivalry, but clearly we don't know the direction of the Bulls of what's going to take place after trade deadline and moving forward if they decide to move Derrick Rose. But I think right now it's marketing teams and perhaps having teams that can sort of have that rivalry. That's why if you look at the Christmas Day games, you look at a lot of that stuff, that is also predicated on rivalries and trying things out. And that's why, the NBA was trying so desperately to have the Lakers and the Clippers be this sort of, rivalry, inner city rivalry comparable to what they tried to do with the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks. But I don't think that'll be the case. Maybe we can see something, perhaps Stephen Curry and LeBron James. But I think at this stage of LeBron's career, he is clearly a better player than Magic Johnson, and obviously a guy that can be marketed just as well as Magic Johnson. But it remains to be seen. I mean, the new cup of tea right now is Stephen Curry, and it'll be interesting to see perhaps if they can formulate a rivalry between these two, the coastal rivalry, but more importantly, if they can get something interconference rivalry that'll be able to sell the game. But I don't think they really need it. I don't think the league really needs that right now. I think that they're holding breath with the notion that possibly Kevin Durant can stay with the Oklahoma City Thunder, as well as Russell Westbrook next year, where you can have, the small market teams now are strong enough to carry the interest. And I think that we do have a situation where you have a lot of parity in basketball somewhat with the teams, but now the small market teams are very strong and they're worth watching now. And that's the result of just really the league pass and just really the marketing of the game.
8 NBA championships, 24 All-Star appearances, 6 seasonal MVPs, 5 Finals MVPs, 18 All-NBA first teams, and 20 All-NBA team selections. Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, you probably will never find a better pairing in an era of basketball where two mighty titans would culminate and clash to some of the most epic battles that you would see, that don jerseys either for the Boston Celtics or the Los Angeles Lakers or just in the NBA in general. Oh, and by the way, they had a couple of cool video games as well, too, to boot. Our man, Gerald Brown, he hosts the Bottom Line Sports Show. Be sure to catch him Saturdays and Sundays, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. He's also on Blog Talk Radio, so be sure to check out the Bottom Line Sports Show on Tuesday nights from 9 to 10:30. Catch him on Sirus XM NBA, channel 207. He is always doing it and doing it lovely with the crew. Gerald, man, we appreciate you once more blessing the microphone and helping us reminisce on such a great era of basketball.
Love is love, fellas. Always, man. Listen, you got my number. Anytime y'all need me, I'm there.
All right. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we reminisce.
Over you, my God.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Just the other night, man, we saw DeMarcus Cousins with a gruesome ankle twist. X-rays are negative, but we're going to presume that DeMarcus Cousins is on a day-to-day basis being looked at, Shaw. I mean, how significant a loss could this be for a Kings team that is right now on the outside looking in, trying to grab that 8th spot in the Western Conference?
Yeah, tough situation. Cousins was just named Player of the Week last week, and our man Jabari Davis had shouted us out for saying that the Kings themselves were better contenders than we originally thought they would be. But now Cousins is going down in a week that the Kings also went 0-4 in. Hopefully he's back up and is going to be able to participate in these upcoming games as the Kings try to fight for that 8th spot in the West.
All right, out in Chicago, Nikola Mirotic. He is out until All-Star. I don't know if whether or not that's a significant blow because clearly Hoiberg has lost confidence in this guy, but maybe the timeout might do him some good, try to refine his game. Sometimes you just need to take a step back, so maybe this injury might be a godsend for his gameplay, man.
Yeah, the Bulls are a Jekyll and Hyde team, and it's a shame that Mirotic has now been relegated to bench duty. He's still producing and still not, fussing about his role, but I think this injury will give him some time to see the game from a different perspective. Bobby Portis will also get some time as well. The Bulls saying right now because of their other injuries that they're not going to make a move, but this is definitely a kind of a blow for this team that they've really been Jekyll and Hyde all season, and they need all hands on deck, especially Mirotic.
It'd be kind of interesting if Nikola Mirotic's name gets thrown out in the hat of a possible move for the right price, if they believe in Bobby Portis a whole lot more than they believe in Mirotic. That would give me a little bit of an interesting thought process there. Out in Phoenix, Brandon Knight has been out with an injury, and clearly Jeff Hornacek has moved forward with Archie Goodwin and Devin Booker as the backcourt. And while this team just really is not a good basketball team, he has seen some bright spots from those guys. But with Brandon Knight being out with a groin injury, Shaw, I still think that the Phoenix Suns are not even nearly half as good as the team as they would even like to think they'd be.
No, that's absolutely true. And there's some murmurs and rumors, again, also about the trade with Brandon Knight, but also some rumors that he might be a shutdown candidate as a result of Phoenix just this being a lost season for them. So they may be trying to improve their draft position one way or the other. And Knight, again, he definitely helps them more than he hurts them when he's healthy. So hopefully he's back on the court soon enough. But if he is shut down, then you can definitely know that Phoenix is in full tank mode.
All right, out in Charlotte, like to welcome this name back, man, because we love guys who have a great acronym for a name. MKG, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, he's returned for the Charlotte Hornets. Is this really a good look, man? Because when you look at Steve Clifford and the job that he's done with the current roster, we often talked about how we would love to see Kidd-Gilchrist finally kind of ascend himself to be a valuable commodity for this Hornets team. And it just looks like this Hornets team has thrived without him. How significant is it now that he's returning for the Charlotte Hornets?
Well, I think this is big because they have a lot of injury issues themselves. Batum has been dealing with the toe issue. We already know Al Jefferson has been out. Jeremy Lin has been in and out of the lineup. So they definitely needed that wing play and that help, and that kind of regulates PJ Harrison back to the bench role, which I feel like he's better served in, especially for this Charlotte team. Hopefully, if they get Al Jefferson back, and if he's another guy they don't move, MKG can bolster that defense, which has slipped a little bit. But with him and Batum, they were really hoping they were going to become an elite level. He looked very good in his first game back already, so hopefully that's a sign of things to come. And I'm really excited about his return, especially after being predicted to be out the entire season.
All right, finally, Shaw, out in Los Angeles. The la drama just doesn't stop, man. D'Angelo Russell apparently now has beef with Byron Scott, but apparently everybody's got beef with Byron Scott. I mean, even the mascot might have beef with Byron Scott. It seems like the only person that advocates for Byron is Kobe Bryant, and he's basically on his farewell tour. So, what do we make of this situation now with D'Angelo Russell and Byron Scott? And is there a writing on the wall that probably is going to lead to some kind of future movement? Maybe not so for Russell, but maybe for Byron Scott.
Well, I mean, I think we all know that Scott's out the door with Kobe. I think Jabari Davis, bringing him up for the second time in the show. But when we did our Pacific preview, he said, listen, Byron Scott, Kobe is his ride. Once Kobe is gone, hey, Byron Scott needs to get in the same car ride and head out the door. He's not the future of the Lakers franchise. And the fact that he and Russell have butted heads so much this season just goes to show that there just seems to be a disconnect there. There was, I think, some very, very loose and false report that Russell or the Lakers have some sort of dissonance after drafting Russell because he's a little prima donna-ish, if you will. But Russell is owning up to things in the press right now, saying, listen, I do need to mature. There are things I need to work on. But it just seems to be that Scott continues to call him out in the media, which just doesn't seem to be a recipe for success, especially for a team that's not winning at all.
This is the most interesting thing I listen to a lot of the media analysts and the way that they're looking at this. It's really panning out like they're saying that the Lakers made a huge mistake drafting D'Angelo Russell, in that third spot in this past year's draft. And so, in my mindset, I'm thinking they still needed a point guard. And if he was legitimately the best point guard that you had on the table to go with, then clearly go ahead and do that. Even if the idea is that you should have gotten a better player in Jahlil Okafor. But, again, Shaw, this to me seems to be more of a chemistry and maturity thing. And look, the Philadelphia 76ers are going through that themselves with Jahlil Okafor. So, I don't know what people in Los Angeles are complaining about. Ultimately, this was part of the process that if they didn't believe in Jordan Clarkson being their point guard for the future, they were going to have to do something. So it'll be interesting to see, but I agree with you, Shaw. I just kind of feel bad. Do you think that this is the last opportunity Byron Scott gets as being a head coach in the NBA?
Well, I think so, but the NBA likes to recycle coaches and some of the same players around, but we do seem to be moving toward a little bit of a younger trend. So I think Scott could go somewhere and be one of those top assistants for, say, if I was a general manager, I don't necessarily think I'd be giving Byron Scott a head coaching job, but I don't think his time as a coach in general is done. But I think at the top level, I think that might be coming to an end.
Yeah, well, look, I've said before, and I had mentioned this when we did our previews of the NBA draft, that I felt that Jahlil Okafor would be the better fit in Minnesota over Karl Anthony Towns, and not to take anything away from Karl Anthony Towns, but it's kind of interesting to me that the two most mature players are literal big men. And they are actually doing damage, for their teams. While the Minnesota Timberwolves don't have the record to show it, the fact that he's playing next to Kevin Garnett and is posting some impressive numbers to be considered in Rookie of the Year, and you look at Kristaps Porzingis, I just think it's really impressive that these two guys are the standouts for this rookie class, and that these guys are really on their way to help resurrecting or help reemerging the presence of what these teams both were doing in the 90s and the early 2000s, when they had the big ticket and when obviously, the New York Knicks had their run. And I think it's really good to see. And I think it's good for the future of basketball that these guys have placated themselves as being legitimate big guys who can actually help their franchise. And it's going to be interesting to see moving forward. But to me, I think that this might be actually the last ride for Byron Scott. I just don't know if after this situation and what's going to happen being the Lakers head coach and all of the drama that surrounded him, that any organization is going to have the utmost confidence in wanting to hire him. I think now is the time where teams are going to start moving on and taking risks with either college-oriented coaches that have great success and great systems, or guys that they know have been a part of the system like a Ron Adams that is deserving to get a shot. Awesome show this week, Shaw. I'm sorry, what were you going to say, man?
No, I'm just saying I agree 100% with that. I think we're just in that new era of management at the top in terms of general management and even in coaching, where some of these old heads, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, don't necessarily need to be continued to be recycled. It's a new age of the NBA, and some of these old heads don't coach to that. They still have their old school mentality, and they can't really relate to some of these younger guys right now. So a guy like Scott seems to be like a guy that doesn't have a bright future as a head coach in the NBA.
I will say, though, it will not surprise me that if Byron Scott does choose to want to be a part of the coaching carousel, so to speak, that he probably might wind up being one of the assistant head coaches maybe for the New York Knicks, which I think is a really good thing, because if you're Derek Fisher, it's not that you cannot have enough head coaching support, and it's great to have a veteran presence probably there to help coach up some of the guard play that the New York Knicks have. I know Derek Fisher is a guard himself, but I really think now he's transitioning himself to be more of the leader, the focus for the voice for that New York Knicks as a head coach. And he doesn't have the time to be able to sit there and really cater to the nuances for some of these younger point guards for the Knicks to take and elevate themselves to the level that they want to start competing, in the Eastern Conference. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I agree with you, Shaw, like we were saying. I just don't see Byron Scott. He's part of an old breed, a dying breed. And it's probably going to be where he's going to be relegated to doing assistant head coach duties. If not, we'll be catching him doing those Laker pregame and postgame shows with James Worthy. Awesome show this week, man. And I'm telling you, we had such a great cast of people on to really break down an awesome week of NBA talk. And it's just been great, man. Awesome stuff, especially as we start gearing our heads towards All-Star Weekend.
Absolutely. Shout out to Daniel and shout out to Gerald for jumping on. That's a great segment we had, bringing the Reminisce segment back. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's something that we will continue to do throughout the season sporadically as we get topics and great guests that can come on and help us and join us out. And if you guys ever have anything that you'd like to see us talk about, make sure you get us at the Twitter handle, at NBA_baseline. We'd love to have that discussion with you, especially about all things basketball, present and old.
Definitely, man. So for the baseline, Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, once again, we'd like to thank Daniel Reynolds of Same Page Team and also RaptorsHQ, and our man Gerald Brown, host of the Line Sports Show. Be sure to catch him on Sirus XM Saturdays and Sundays. Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch up with you next time.